Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Summer, and I'm the founder of Epiphany. As you know, this is our fourth Epiphany Talks, which is one of the sessions that we launched in the wake of COVID-19. It aims to answer some of the questions about different industries that have been impacted because of COVID-19, both positively and negatively, and what the future holds for all of us as individuals, as communities, as countries. So today, the topic obviously is very, very interesting because one of the most impacted industries is the aviation industry. In fact, in March 2020, the International Air Transport Association estimated that the airline industry could lose between $63 to $113 billion of revenue as a result. Previously, this was expected to be about $30 billion. Obviously, this is because of travel restrictions as well as slump in demand among travelers. And obviously, let's see, even post COVID-19, once the restrictions travel restrictions are lifted, will people still travel, or will people opt to communicate much more virtually? So we're not really sure what the future holds. And today, we've got two experts with us, both from different parts, who've been catering to different parts of the aviation industry. And we're expecting to answer, obviously, the biggest question in front of us, which is, will the airline industry survive? And if yes, how is it going to survive? What is going to be the new normal, both as individuals, as countries? Will there be a new world order when it comes to traveling internationally, domestically? What does the future hold for all of us? The topic today is airlines battling for survival. And with me, without much ado, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Mohammed Qazi. Assalamu alaikum.
Well, salam. Thanks.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. So Mohammed Qazi has more than 10 years in the aviation sector. He's held very, very senior positions ranging from Chief Executive Officer to Chief Commercial Officer, Managing Director, Head of Restructuring Committee for Civil Aviation Authority in the UAE, and member of Steering Committee, General Civil Authority, UAE, etc. So we're going to be able to talk to him in a lot of depth, because his experience not only spans across the GCC, but also Asia, Africa, and the UK. And his work experience is very diverse. So it includes finance, commercial, general management, and strategy. And he's been able to work with a lot of rulers, that's what I wanted to say, royal family members, high net worth individuals, and ministers. He's also been recognized as 50 most influential expats in the Middle East. So I think we're going to be able to learn a lot from Mr. Qazi. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more for our audience?
Yes, thanks, Summer. Hi, everyone. I think the introduction Summer has made is quite comprehensive. I have been in the industry for slightly longer than 10 years, but 10 years, I would say, have been a mix of international exposure. So in the UAE, I've been here since 2011. Prior to that, I was in UK. I worked across different types of airports and different businesses within the aviation umbrella. So aviation umbrella is quite broad. You've got airports, you've got airlines, you've got ground handling companies, you've got catering companies, cargo companies. It's linked with other industries such as tourism, trade, and commerce. So it's an industry which is kind of a backbone of economy. And I've been fortunate enough to work across a number of these sectors within the industry. And I'm looking forward to this session and answer any questions which will come up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, with us, we've got our second panelist, Chris Grove. Did I pronounce you right, Chris?
Yep.
Okay, so welcome. He's joining us all the way from Texas, where it is 5 a.m. in the morning. So thank you very much.
Actually, Chicago, so a little further north than Texas.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, fine. All right. So how are you doing? Have you had a chance to make your coffee and have it yet? Or not?
I've got it right here. So apologize to the viewers if they see me sneaking a sip of coffee every once in a while.
No, I think for all of us, because in Pakistan it's right now 3 p.m. and for Rehan, for Mohammed Qazi, it's going to be 2 p.m. So it's we're close to opening our iftar. So we need our coffee and tea right now. So it's okay. We're not going to mind that at all. So Chris is a planning associate at Cushing's and Grove. He's an airport planner at the airport planning firm where he works. and he specializes in financial capital planning and grant management. He also leads the firm's airport forecasting initiatives. And what's very interesting is that he co-founded Runway VC, which is aimed at building an international community for startups and innovation in the aviation industry. So I think, Chris, your job just got more interesting, huh? In like COVID-19.
It's yeah, interesting is a good word. Some others would call it hectic, but
would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself for the audience?
Yeah, so my background's actually in economics. So I kind of got a data nerd bug in me. My interest really focuses on watching trends, just kind of evolving from there. And then seeing, how those trends and also things that people think are unrelated. As Mohammed said, the travel industry is impacted by a lot of different things, not just airplanes, but tourism and commerce and trade, et cetera. So it's interesting to see all those things come together, and then not so good, but also interesting to see what happens when all those things just stop. So.
Okay, so let me start off with my first question for you, Mohammed Qazi. Could you tell us a little bit, for the audience, what is the impact of COVID-19 going to be?
Look, I think we have seen the impact already around the world. Aviation industry, or I would say aviation and related industries, which is like tourism industries, taking a major hit. They've been around 1 million job losses per week on average. The forecast initially came out was around 50 million job losses across the world in this particular industry. So the impact of COVID-19 has taken its effect, and it's very much, I would say, at going at full steam at the moment. However, having said that, I think we've seen crisis in the past, whether it is wars or it is other viruses or it is the recession, which has impacted economies in the past. This is slightly different in the sense that there is a complete lockdown in a lot of countries. It's restricting people movement. So I think for this particular industry, for our industry, it's played a major role in slowing things down. However, having said that, there's a lot of negativity around at the moment. And what I want to do in this session is that talk about some of the positives, because while this is going on, it is not an eternal issue. There are, as we know, that the human testing of the vaccines has started. We are probably 9 to 12 months away from having vaccines. So up until that point, a lot of planning is required. Up until that point, a lot of thinking, and as Chris will probably touch on this later on, is that a lot of data and analysis is required as to what do we do now, and then how do we prepare for a new future, a slightly different type of future, up until the vaccine comes, right? Because once the vaccine comes, I'm hoping that the things will return back to normal. It's going to take time because that's how economic cycles work. But I think we will get back to some sort of normality probably in 18 to 24 months' time. As the economy slows down, it will take time to build things up again, okay, to gain the momentum. But as a whole, I would say that the impact of COVID-19 is very much running at full steam. It has made the impact it was supposed to make, and now it is reaching a maturity point in its curve. And I would also say that this period, if you look at it from a businessman point of view, if you look at it from a CEO point of view, you would use this period to replan, okay, regroup and replan of how you're gonna come out at the other end. And that's what a lot of people in my circle are doing, looking at the situation. And then, in every business, there's a lot of things you want to do. There's a lot of changes you want to bring about, but you can't because business are a going concern. It's a continuous process. So this is giving you a little pause. So you press that pause button and you replan. A lot of routes may be taken out by airlines, which were not very productive routes. there need to be a lot of replanning in terms of route development, in terms of fleet planning, and for the airports, the infrastructure providers, there needs to be a lot of thinking about the operational processes. So I think in the period while we have this lockdown, these kinds of plans should be taking place, so that when these things start to become normal again, we are ready to hit the ground again. So that's what I would say my views on this situation at the moment.
And we'll dig deeper on some of the things that you've talked about right now, Mohammed Qazi. But in the meantime, Chris, what are you seeing? What is your take on this?
Yeah, so here in the U.S., it's essentially come to a standstill. I mean, you've got the numbers of travelers have dropped, I think, down almost 95%. So it's pretty staggering when you see pictures of planes taking off with one passenger, in it, and a full crew on a 737. I think that we were riding high before this. The industry was seeing year-over-year gains in terms of passengers. Airports were really busting at the seams, quite literally in the U.S. and even all around the world. You were seeing massive amounts of money being spent on new terminals, growing infrastructure, and I think it'll be a while before we return back to those numbers. I'm seeing some projections of 3 to 4 years. I think that's probably a little optimistic, but there were. You also see the articles where it may never return back. I don't know if that's the case either. I think we will, as Mohammed said, we will get back to some sense of normalcy. It's just not a matter of if, but when. In the meantime, we've had a lot of airports that have put hold on infrastructure projects. Some were necessary because they were just aging infrastructure, so they're moving forward. But again, you're looking at, from my standpoint, when I look at the financial numbers, it's really trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to pay for some of these things, especially if you were an airport that was looking at loaning some of that money, based on future revenue. So borrowing that money based on future revenue for passengers. Those are the airports that are also looking at going back to their spreadsheets and figuring out, what does the future look like over the next few years, and are these projects that we had planned going to be able to be financed, because our passenger numbers won't be there.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the different strategies which people are adopting and what you're seeing already. So Mohammed Qazi, what are you seeing in the UAE particularly, but also across GCC, across Asia, across some of the markets that you worked in? What are some of the steps that people are taking to possibly survive, basically, until this crisis is over? Whether it's 10 months or 3 years or 5 years, what are some of the strategies that they're taking right now?
I mean, in terms of strategies, I'll give you a mix of what's going on in Asia, Middle East, and Europe. Similar sort of behaviors are taking place. Airlines have cut down, and airports. Aviation industry has cut down a number of jobs. In some instances in the Middle East, people have been asked to stay at home till things get better. In the Western world, people have furloughed, so they're getting some sort of government support. But generally speaking, a vast number of people have been, I would say, parked for the time being. And at the same time, some of the big consultancies I work with, one in particular, it's called ASM Route Global. It is a big consultancy in UK, airport strategy and marketing. And conversations I've been having with them, and some of the white papers they have released, which have been very, very useful in the industry, have talked about various things, but the main thing everyone is really focused on is the return to operations again. And what they have been talking about in particular are health checks on the networks to start from. So the airlines will be now looking at networks, and which networks will they start from. So, for example, Air Arabia has announced yesterday in the newspapers that they will start normal operations from 1st of June. Now, though we are saying that things are very pessimistic at the moment, some airlines are actually coming forward and saying that they've got certain operational tweaks in place which enables them to start again. So they would be going back to likes of ASM of this world and saying, okay, let us help check which are the best routes for us, which is based on number of passenger demand you're going to get for what to the different routes you can operate into. There's also a robust yet conservative forecast. So reforecasting needs to happen. So a lot of work which will be taking place now is probably in Chris's domain, which is forecast and reforecast. Look at short-term, mid-term, and long-term forecasting of passenger trends. It's like you're going back to square one. You're starting again, and you got to come up with those business cases again for each route which you're going to operate. So that's what will be going on. And then I would say aviation industry is always known for a lot of analysis. So usage of high quality analytical tools for more accurate and dependent forecast is need of the time to understand the behaviors. Something I came across recently, it's called a catchment analyzer, which is again a product developed by ASM. And this is a very useful tool because it looks at a catchment around the airport and looks at how many people are going to be flying from that catchment to what kind of destinations, how long for, where do they originate from, where are they going to. And it looks at past trends to predict the future. So this kind of data, looking at MIDT data, which is market information data tables, looking at GDS data, looking at civil aviation data, looking at tourism data, it's all going to go back to that and review what was happening in a similar sort of situation in the past, and then how things got better again, and where did that growth come from. And this is what at the detail level will be going on at airlines, at airports, and in the tourism industry.
Do you expect that there will be more collaboration between different aviation airline carriers, for instance?
I mean, in my opinion, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but in my opinion, there needs to be a communal response. So there needs to be an alignment between airline behaviors, market demand factors, and a government intervention, an extent of government intervention. I think these three components which have to be brought together. If you remember, just before the COVID-19 happened, there was a big legacy charter airline which went bust in the UK called Thomas Cook. That happened prior to any of this kicked in, right? So the economy was slowing down. Some airlines was suffering. The industry was seeing that the occupancy levels in the hotels were slightly lower than normal. So we were seeing a global trend of reaching that, because recessions are cyclical, we were reaching a point where it might kick in. Germany had announced that they had a weak quarter beginning of the year, and they were waiting. If they had another weak quarter, they would be officially going into recession. We knew South Africa was in recession. So a lot of economic slowdown was going on. And what happens in these situations is that mergers take place. So when Thomas Cook issue happened, I happened to be in UK at the time, and I was talking to some of my colleagues in the industry. And the obvious thing was that the existing airlines, such as TUI at the time, would take over those slots and would take over those routes. What will happen is, in the process, some routes are going to get taken over and they will continue to run them. Some slots are going to get taken over, and especially the slots are available at some of the big, busy airports. So if you're talking about Dubai Airport, you're talking about Heathrow Airport, Gatwick Airport, or various airports, Atlanta and other airports, Chicago, the slots become available. Slots are valuable, and a lot of airlines are waiting for a lot of years to get those slots. So those slots get sold. So it's a business is is an evolutionary process, right? So you start, you grow, you innovate, you survive, or you die, and then it's only
And then it
anomaly
starts all
here
over
is,
again.
yeah, and the anomaly here is that there's an impact of COVID, which has taken a major hit on the global economy. So I think the process will continue, but there needs to be a collaboration. There needs to be a communal response. Having run an airport in the past for many years, one of the things I would do with airlines was I had to give them the right incentives for them to operate from my airport. So airports have to play a major part in this. Okay, help them with good quality reports and business cases to attract those airlines to come and operate, and then give them the right incentives to operate from your airport. Other thing is, like, because of COVID-19 and the price war in oil industry, the oil is normally 50% of airline operational cost. So that is going to be a saving for airlines from my point of view. There are going to be better deals available for airlines from airport side. There are going to be better deals available for airlines from aircraft leasing companies. So if the airlines have got a tough phase to go through, but they've got all the, I would say, all the enablers in their hands to make a compelling a business case to start operating from the right routes once again.
Do you think that so one of the things that lots of things that you said are interesting, but one of the things which kept coming to my mind about social distancing and what that means when you're actually sitting in a plane. So are there going to be extra seats which are going to be just empty? And then what would that mean for fares for individuals to travel at the end of the day, right? So obviously with the fuel going down and some of these cost savings coming through, do you think that this is going to be something that we would do you think that people would still be able to afford air travel?
Interesting question. I have looked at some of the fare prices recently, and yes, they have doubled or tripled, and that is going to be an issue. Now, if you remember, when the oil prices went down in 2012-13, the consumers expected a drop down in the fare value. Okay, but airlines did not do that. They continued to charge more because they said that when the fuel prices were high, they incurred a lot of losses. So again, I think the fare prices are going to be quite high because the airlines would like to recover the losses of this period. And this is where other parties or the community as a whole comes together. So the government intervention, other contributors or stakeholders of the industry have to give the right incentives so the fare price stays reasonable. If it's like, as I've said, I've seen three-fold growth or three growth increment on fare price. That is obviously not going to entice a lot of people to travel, except those who are looking at necessary travel, such as business people, or where they are. There's going to be more business travel, in my opinion, than leisure travel if it goes down that road on the fare price. And in terms of social distancing in the aircraft, yes, it will be interesting to see, because I've seen various different versions of aircraft seats in the recent past. Some are coming up with like a window, or not a window, but a barrier between passengers. But if some have suggested that there may be an empty seat in the middle. Of course, you can't operate like that, because you won't hit the minimum occupancies, which is in the region of mid-60s to break even on a flight. So in order to push it north of 65%, you can't leave seats empty. So I think this is where, again, I think a communal response comes into it, and airports have to play a big part. So before you onboard and a passenger, you got to do a temperature check. You got to make sure that there are some sanitizers available in the plane. You got to make sure that they've got face masks, and make sure that the cabin crew is looked after, so they are fully covered in whatever is advised by the doctors. And in that way, if you can only bring people on board who are not potentially sick,
Yeah.
that's the best way of minimizing the impact.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move over to Chris. So Chris, few questions for you, right? So on the financial forecasting, how do you think, people will adapt and what's going to happen over there? What are you seeing? So that's one. And then also, last time around when we saw major kind of transformation was post 9/11. So we saw all of these new things happening, sanitation, transparent bags to carry your cosmetics, the kind of checks that you had to go through, the scanners which we were not comfortable with originally, the large waiting lines, etc., all the long waiting lines, all of that, right? So we saw all of these things happen, and in a way it was yes, it started off in the US, but then the whole world followed through. Maybe domestic flights, obviously Pakistan is very different, right? So you could still get away with very lax kind of travel requirements, but across the globe we saw certain things which were just implemented and they were the law. So what do you think is going to happen post 9/11? So yeah.
Yeah. So from the financial standpoint,
post 9/11, no, sorry, post COVID.
Yeah, no, you're fine. So from a financial standpoint, I think right now it's survival mode. And I think that is dependent upon the country that the various airports and airlines are in. You're seeing some airlines in the States, they were all given the opportunity to, it had some strings attached, but all given the opportunity to receive some type of funding from the U.S. government on just making sure that their staff was paid and they were able to keep the doors open for some point of time. That's not a sustainable business model here in the States. I think in other countries where you've got airlines operating, you're going to see, at the end of the day, I think you are going to see some airlines go out of business, and even I think the first will be, file for bankruptcy. Again, depending upon which country you're in, that means different things. But I do think you're going to see some airlines, all of them are going to hit financial hardships, and I don't know how many of them make it without any financial assistance from the government. But even that trickles down to airports. So even from the United States, again, recently we had every airport, every commercial service airport that was publicly owned in the States got some type of money from the federal government in addition to what they get every year. So again, in the States, we get every airport gets some money every year for capital improvement projects, et cetera. This time they've got that money, plus they got additional money to really help pay for, again, staffing issues or anything they needed that revenue was falling short on covering. So it's survival mode at this point. Once you get on the other side, you'll see a lot of government regulations dictating how airports can respond to this. That same with 9/11, right? Airports themselves didn't take on the initiative to increase security. That wasn't something that airports got together and said, "Hey, we're going to do this, for ourselves." It was something that was mandated by the governments of the various countries, and even impacted from outside governments, right? So I believe it was last year or year before. At this point in time, it's just all running together when you're locked down. But we saw the United States cut off or drastically restrict, and even cut off travel to certain countries because they were saying that their security at airports wasn't sufficient. So they said, you're not providing sufficient screening for passengers on the planes. You can't fly into the United States. So I think you're going to see that also take into effect. And like Mohammed said, you're going to see temperature checks. You're going to see screening and sanitation stations, for lack of a better term. Those are trends that aren't, I think a lot of people are throwing around like these are going to be new trends and new things that are just going to pop out of nowhere. And I don't buy that when it comes to innovation. No innovation comes from nothing, right? Innovation isn't something that just pops up out of nowhere. It's usually an evolution of something that's already happened or something that is happening. So at this point, I think you're going to see a lot of notes being taken and a lot of cues being taken from the Asian airlines and airports who have been temperature screening for a long time, right? So some of these things that we're going to see in place in airports that have never had to deal with this were already in place when they were trying to kind of deal with SARS and those types of responses. The technology will be better because it always, year over year, technology gets better, and you're looking for different things to kind of spot. So obviously the SARS response is going to be different from the COVID response to an extent, but I think the principles are still going to be the same.
Well, so I was just thinking, so on a lighter note, right? So my mom and my daughter are both big fans of the food that you get, in the airplanes. How do you think this is going to happen, right? So is there going to be limited food or no food at all?
So a lot of airlines have already come out and said that they're going to stop food service for domestic flights. I think United is going to take a individually wrapped. So rather than kind of walk down the aisle and hand pretzels and cookies for domestic flights, they're going to have individually wrapped snack packs. I think you're going to see that. But I do think you're going to see a limitation on food. From a sanitation standpoint and just an overall kind of healthy approach, but it also saves airlines money. So don't for a second think that is not something that if there is a way to cut revenue or cut expenses to be able to increase their profit on their revenue, they're looking at all of that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember traveling through EasyJet and JetBlue and, really, so in Pakistan, we're all big biryani fans, okay? So each time you travel, there's one standard food at dinner time, which is biryani. So all of us are used to having that. But I think obviously that's going to change. But then again, coming back to what you were saying, Mohammed Qazi, obviously in a way, right? I mean, you can't really leave empty seats in the middle because then you're still passing through. If you have to get to the window seat, you're still passing in front of a passenger. But I was kind of like just imagining, how when they spray all of these aerosols, this air freshener, right, in Pakistani planes at least. So something like that, where there are disinfectants, being sprayed, hand with sanitizers on and off and whatever. So you can see things like that, maybe automated. And then of course, bathroom usage. So maybe limiting that to 4 people or 5 people or whatever that new standard may be. But one of the other questions which I had, so now there are all of these planes which are being parked and, they're not operating anymore and airlines need to survive. Do you think that maybe some of the airlines are going to try and sell their planes to, richer people, richer families? What do you think, Mohammed Qazi? Do you think that may be one of the strategies that people will adopt?
I mean, a lot of aircrafts are leased. Nobody buys planes these days, so they'll be on different types of lease agreements with the major lease companies or lessors. So you're looking at wet lease, dry lease, ACMI, and unfortunately, a lot of times aircrafts are leased. In order to get the lease costs down, you lease on a long term. So an aircraft will be leased probably for 5 years or 10 years, in which case, when it's not flying, it has to be parked in a certain way. They just can't be just left parked and, not to care for them. Aircrafts are highly sophisticated assets and they have to be maintained to the international civil aviation standards. So that's a major cost for airlines. Even when they park them, they have to put a maintenance program for each aircraft. So no, I don't think that a lot of aircrafts will be sold to rich people because rich people don't buy these bigger aircrafts. They would buy private jets, which I've run a private charter airline for a number of years. So in that space, they're not looking for these types of aircrafts. So it's unfortunate fact that there's going to be an oversupply of aircrafts in the industry, and the big airlines will be negotiating and renegotiating with the lessors at the moment for this period. But lessors have their own issue because they are the ones who acquired the aircrafts. So they have to pay their banks whatever is due every month. So it's all part of one big global circle, I would say. And everyone within that is affected. And hence I've said that it's a communal issue. And in this instance, with regards to the aircraft, the governments have to play a major part, in my humble opinion. The government intervention, it's key to this, because no single airline or a businessman or even an airline group would be able to sustain this, because I know the prices of leasing aircrafts, and they're not cheap. And if you don't fly them, they will just sink you. They'll bankrupt you. That's how it works.
And I think we've seen some of that, right? Some of that response is coming out. I think in the US, $58 billion bailout was, signed off by President Trump. But of course, not every government has those kind of resources to pitch in as well. Even though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I did at one of the airports I was managing once. We dismantled a 9-year-old aircraft. It was A340 500 series, Airbus 340, a wide body aircraft, a book value of $77 million. And in its 9th year, it was completely dismantled. The avionics were taken out, the valuables are taken out and kept in the store to be used with other aircrafts in the fleet, and the metal was scrapped. And this was done at a loss, but that was to cut the loss to a minimum before it gets a bigger loss. So those kind of radical actions I have seen in my career being taken by airlines to cut their losses. So it can be as radical as that.
So, and Chris, for you, I just wanted to find out, right? So what about low-fare airlines? When we're talking about survival, will they even survive, or will they just, have to pack up? Because we're already seeing airlines going bankrupt. So.
Yeah. And I don't, I think I don't want to get, it's too early to get into actual predictions in terms of who will be standing and who won't be. But obviously the low cost airlines are going to be, one of the ones that are one of the groups that are hardest hit, because they just don't have as much cash on hand. And if they are regulated to institute some type of social distance program, they can't survive. I think it was Ryanair's CEO recently said that if they are enforced, if they're told that they can't fly with middle seats, passengers in the middle seats, they simply won't fly, because they can't operate and make any money doing that with those types of load factors. So I think with the low cost carriers, they tend to prefer your tourist destinations. So it's almost a double hit in a sense that you're going to have a skittish public. People are already going to be skittish flying when things return to quote unquote normal. But then you've got to take into account that you're looking at a lot of countries, United States included, where they were instituting mass shelter in places, closing restaurants, bars, cafes, and other non-essential businesses. So you're looking at people that essentially been unemployed for at least 6 weeks, maybe even longer, depending on the country. So do they even have the income to travel, to the destinations? And in addition to not wanting to be on an airplane, do you want to go to Disney World, right? Like, is that going to be somewhere that you're going to be comfortable bringing your family to? It's so those airlines are going to be hit on a couple different fronts because of that. And I think it's going to be just to grit your teeth and kind of survive with the cash on hand. And if you make it out on the other end, then great. And if you don't, Mohammed mentioned earlier about airlines perhaps acquiring, the ones that are going defunct, getting acquired. I think you may see some of that, but I don't know if it's going to be to the effect that it was in 2008. Because Mohammed, the only reason why I push on that a little bit is because 2008 hit different airlines differently, where everybody was impacted. But, if you were betterly financially sustainable, or if you were serving an industry that was doing, I mean, every industry took a hit, but the industries weren't all hit equally, right? So some industries were faring off better than others. Some parts of the world were faring off better than others. In this instance, everybody's been hit. And so, in order to acquire an airline, you need cash. And I don't know how many airlines are actually going to have enough cash to actually perform acquisitions by the time this is all said and done. It's going to be interesting to see what comes out of it. And if you do have the acquisition, the cash for an acquisition, then the question for the CEO becomes, do you acquire it and hope you generate more revenue, or do you keep that cash on hand because you don't know how long this is going to go for? So, those are the types of conversations that I can't imagine airlines are having right now, but I would imagine that, by the time the summer ends and fall comes around, you're going to start seeing some more conversations pop up.
Okay, so we've got a question from somebody in the audience, Kamran Khan. He's asking, will traveling ever be the same once the pandemic is over?
I guess it depends on what your definition of the same is. Will travel be like it was in January? No. Because you're going to have different policies in place. You're going to have screening in place. I would imagine at the very least, every airline is going to require everyone to wear a mask throughout the entire trip. That's not,
and gloves. I think gloves as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just not the same, right? I wasn't doing that in January and even February. But there are some parts of the world where that's the normal. That's wearing a mask outside is the norm. So again, and that mostly out in the countries that were heavily impacted by SARS. So I think if you want to know what the airline industry is going to kind of get a glimpse of the window is, look at some of the countries that have already dealt with viruses and how they're handling it, and then take those trends and add a multiplier to it. So turn up the impact because obviously this virus has been globally impactful as opposed to some of the ones in the past.
So coming back to some of the other industries, or let's say affiliate segments of the entire travel industry. So it used to be fun to be at airports. You had all of these shops there. You had all of the food options over there. What do you guys, both of you, what do you see the future will look like? Will there be more automation? Will we even have, what's going to happen? Are we going to be able to see employees there, or is it robots? What are we seeing? Or is it self-service? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I think it's going to be all of that. Again, automation and self-service, not new things, right? These were trends that were starting to happen. You were starting to see glimpses of that pop up here and there before the pandemic really hit. So I think you're going to see those trends really start to increase, where you're looking at food and beverages being able to order those ahead of time and be ready for when you cross security. Passenger tracking within airports, that technology is going to just continue to skyrocket. Remote temperature sensing, that technology is going to continue to grow and really get push forward drastically in the next couple of years. But yeah, I think you're going to see automation. I don't think it's going to get, at least in the short term, because the technology is not ready yet. You're not going to get your McDonald's cheeseburgers made with an automated burger flipper or that type of stuff. But I do think you're going to see some technology in the terms of janitorial services, robots kind of basically industrial Roombas and driving around, mopping the floors and spraying disinfectant. But that's not new technology, today. It's new technology within the past few years, but, you saw Chinese airports experimenting with that technology even before the pandemic was put into place.
I think, Mohammed Tas, you may want to add something. I don't know. You feel it looks like as if you want to say something.
I mean, I'll be listening to Chris, and I'm learning a few new things. No, look, I think, as I said before, I'm a bit more of an optimist. I've run airports, run airlines. I've been at the operational front in the industry. So every time you get a challenge, you come up with a solution to deal with that challenge, because life goes on. Human beings are very robust creation. They adapt to changes and to their surroundings, and the cultures develop. And what was the case yesterday, it will not be the case tomorrow. And people just learn the new ways of living in a changing world we live in. So I remember when the water issue came about in UK, and every time you were traveling from airside to landside, if you had a water bottle or anything which was liquid, more than 100 mils, you couldn't take it across, but you could buy it inside, which was really odd for people to get their heads around. Then the laptop thing kicked in. Then the issue we had with Samsung, a Note 7 or 6, I think. We've got issues currently with MacBook Pro. We had issue of not being able to carry laptops in trolley bags on board, in the cabin, but you got to check it in. So these kinds of things have been going on, right? And every time it happens, people get a bit annoyed because it's not the norm. And then because they're told that this is how it is going to be, they have to accept it. So I think certain things will change. Robotics are playing a bigger part in our world now. So the more of that you will see in the coming future, probably is going to be accelerated. But that was always coming, right? I think one of the things in the shorter period of time will change is that low-cost carriers brought about ease of traveling, affordability for travelers, and that's what low cost did. That increased, and it had a much greater economic impact because every dollar which is spent in the aviation industry gives an 11% or 11 times growth outside of the dependent industries linked with the aviation industry. So so nowadays people by default, the understanding is if I want to go from point A to B, I can catch a flight which takes me from A to B. I don't think that will be the case in the post-COVID era. Not a point-to-point or destination of choice will disappear. So there's going to be a lot of hub and spoke type of setup again, probably. So you will go to a main hub airport, and from there you make your own journey to your final destination. So because of trying to consolidate passengers in an aircraft and make it more economically viable. So from a low cost point of view, which Chris touched on earlier, I think low cost airlines tend to be quite cash rich. I've worked with a number of them, and they are very few airline within the airline industry. Very few airlines are profitable. A lot of them make losses, but low-cost airlines tend to make a decent amount of profit. If you look at Air Arabia in the Middle East, it's the biggest, it's the most successful low-cost airline, and it's cash-rich, and it is also profitable. If you look at Ryanair, it's a highly profitable organization, and I've worked as a service provider at Ryanair for a number of years, so I understand the commercial model, the ancillary revenue-based model. And how that model converts into economics. So I think low cost will play a part, but while the low cost was flying to a lot of new destinations, are going to open up in the recent past. That's a change which we'll have to accept and live with. So if I want to go from from Dubai to an airport, a destination in Egypt, say Alexandria, for example, I might have to go to Cairo. Okay. That may not happen because of the volume restrictions, because of lesser people traveling. So these kinds of things have to be revisited. So from a passenger point of view, I don't think you're going to have as much choice as you used to have in the next 4 to 5 years. I think the choices are going to disappear. In terms of services at airports, I think the services will come back in because it's a massive revenue earner, and maybe you have tables more distanced apart in restaurants and airports, for example, but that will continue because without that, there is no commercial. If there's no commerciality behind all of this, the whole thing collapses. Okay, so I think there's going to be a radical change in the way things are done. A lot of, as Chris has identified, a lot of learning is going to be taken from the Far Eastern countries, where they have been able to contain the spread of the virus and how they've done that. And those kinds of things are going to be copied and pasted across other places. But innovation is going to play a big part. They need to be enhanced. And that's how it's going to be. So it's not going to be the same, but it's going to be slightly different. And it's not going to have, we will not have as many choices we used to have in the next 4 to 5 years, but then things will start improving, and also us as consumers will become used to how the new world operates.
Yeah. So look, there are very, very interesting things, right? Talking about the new opportunities. So what you're reflecting on includes a big, huge opportunity for local travel operators, for instance. So now they have to get creative. So when somebody lands in Cairo and they want to go to Alexandria or wherever else, okay, what is the best way to take them, which is as risk-free as possible? And I think people who are traveling, so I think there's also going to be this shift in the kind of travelers that we see, right? So a lot of young people who were now able to, jump on low-cost budget airlines and just travel across the world, they're going to perhaps not be able to travel or reduce the number of times they travel every year. But then again, when we're talking about older people or people with more money, or the ones who are business people who are traveling, what sort of new possibilities for exploring a new city exist for them? So I think that's an opportunity. And then again, the other, so a few years back, there were a few startups that popped up where people would ask them to bring stuff back home for them. So if you're coming from the US or the UK and you want something delivered, they'll carry it for you. So those kind of things are again going to come up. New opportunities at an individual level as well. So I think, while we just have less than 10 minutes left, so maybe if we could talk a little bit about the kind of opportunities that are emerging, both from the startups, because a lot of our community people who will be watching this video later on as well are startups or small businesses, SMEs. So what are some of these opportunities for them, and where should they be looking? So if they are looking to enter into this industry now, what are the new opportunities that they should be looking to capitalize on? So Chris, maybe we can start with you and then come back to Mohammed.
Yeah. So I think that when you talk about opportunities, you're really looking at, what does the future hold? What are some of the things? What is the future going to look like? And I don't have my crystal ball polished up just yet, but I think the best way that I try to figure that kind of stuff out is really looking at kind of the natural trend of business and really humans, is that when we're put into a difficult situation, something that we have to survive, we tend to contract to our core competencies, right? So you're going to see a lot of the airports and airlines kind of where they were playing around and maybe doing some experiments in a few different things, they're going to start going back to what they did best, because that's what made them the most revenue. And also from a process standpoint, it's also been where they've made those processes the most efficient and cut the most cost, right? So efficiency equals cost cutting. So I think what you can do if you were a startup or a small business really looking at those opportunities is to, as those big businesses start to contract and go back to their core competencies, as Mohammed mentioned, airlines going back to their money-making routes, airports looking at their restaurants and even the restaurants themselves, really going back to saying, okay, what makes us the most money and what is the most efficient process that we have in place? As they start to contract, go back to look at the experiments that were being conducted before, the pandemic and see what the results of those were, right? The great thing about this point in time is there hasn't been a lot of time passed between the before and the after, right? So those results, while they'll be different because your circumstances have changed, the mindset of people will still be there. So as I said earlier, I think automation in the food service, when it comes to airports, if I was a startup, I'd be looking at how do I automate that process as much as possible from ordering to delivering on the customer side. So how do you make that experience the best? There was a big initiative happening before that I'm sure Mohammed's familiar with from IATA. It was the seamless passenger experience. So the idea that you went from curbside to aircraft to then curbside on your destination airport in one seamless experience with as little interaction with people as possible. And I don't mean like from an introverted, I don't want to talk to anybody interaction, but from like you were able to kind of from security to go through security without really going through security. You were able to get your boarding pass and check your luggage and all that kind of stuff. All that technology is going to be, again, just the gas has been poured on that fire. So those were experiments that were already happening where you were getting automated bag drop off. You were getting automated ticketing. There were even some experiments, and I had seen some technologies with startups beforehand with, passive, what they were calling passive security, where you just walk through and through artificial intelligence and kind of better cameras, they were able to see kind of what you had on you and knew what was a weapon, what wasn't a weapon, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you're going to see those are the types of technologies that are going to continue to grow because they were experiments that were already happening, and they reinforce this idea that you don't want to touch, you want to limit your touch points. From a food service, I go back to it because I really do think it's a trend. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but in the United States, Starbucks was just taking off with their ordering ahead and being able to order a drink ahead and go right into a Starbucks, pick it up and walk out, not having to talk to anybody. I think that's the technology. And if you're not familiar with it and you are looking at starting a company in that space, I would use Starbucks and try to figure out from a case study standpoint what technology they had in place and what they were doing because it worked. And you're just going to see more and more of that.
Yeah. Oh, just talking about what you finished off with, right? So it's always been easy. So you can choose your meal beforehand. Is it vegetarian? Is it going to be, is it a kid's meal, etc.? So you could already do that. It's just, finding, making some tweaks here and there. Some of it is going to be as simple as that. But then also interestingly, right? Because we know that so far younger people, bounce back, or you may actually opt to choose to sit next to somebody who you think is safer for you when you're traveling. I don't know. I mean, you're kind of like maybe that's where you're always
and I think also coming to the terms with folks that in the past were hesitant about adopting technology are now being forced to adopt new technology. So you're looking at a whole new area of people. Like my parents, for example, my mom had never done a video call other than FaceTime, but she didn't know what Zoom was before the pandemic. And now my family, cousins, aunts, uncles, everybody is we're doing Zoom birthdays. And so now she thinks it's, oh, look how cool it is that you can change the background on your Zoom calls. And, she now knows what Zoom is, and she would never have known that before this. So I think you're looking at an opportunity of people that are going to be, that were forced to use technology that before this or without this would have never even adopted in the past.
You use that term that, okay, now you've put the gas on it, right? So in simple terms, we are accelerating a lot of things that we wanted to do, perhaps. it is the time to re-strategize, like Mohammed Qazi was suggesting, right? All of us are sitting down and really rethinking the way we wanted to do business, and perhaps also just in a way there were so many things that we wanted to do, but we were unable to do simply because we were firefighting, or we were just doing business as usual, which was taking up a lot of time anyway, right? So
Yep.
I think this is a time to evolve, to change, to tweak the business model, to collaborate more, to really think about what you want to achieve from this crisis, right? You want to emerge stronger, or are you just going to become, I think the phase for demotivation anyway is over, right? So there was this curve where everybody was very demotivated and energy levels were down, and now people are like, okay, this is the new normal. What am I going to do now, right? So I think, Mohammed Qazi, would you like to add something? And then I'm just going to ask for your final thoughts, both of you.
Sure. I've just been making some notes, and like I visited a few incubation centers in Pakistan. So the guys who are on the call, if they are anywhere affiliated with those kinds of places, where they should be thinking about how do you create an opportunity out of it. There are a few areas. A lot of that is to do with what Chris has mentioned. It's about technology. Then going into the specifics of that technology, what are those touch points is where the value lies. So other day, I just went to the supermarket and I saw this face mask for 100 dirhams, which is probably about $25. So I thought, okay, that's an interesting price for a face mask. But I won't be surprised if you get a face mask with a Bluetooth connection in it, and a few other gadgets to go with their headphone, because face mask is going to become the new norm. So, right, let's think about face mask, which is hygienic, right? So it's top-notch hygiene on the hygiene front. But guess what? It's got a Bluetooth earphone with it. It's got headphones attached to it, which can be Bluetooth to your phone or iPod or whatever. So that's just like being completely thinking radically and coming up with, okay, this is the new norm. This could be something. But going back to more practical side, technologies which are to do with passenger tracking, PAX tracking is going to be very, very interesting and important. Technologies which are linked with robots are going to be, or robots are going to play a major part in the future within this industry and elsewhere. There is, you could probably bring together security with hygienic checks, right? Hygiene checks or medical checks, because everyone has to go through security. That security perhaps needs to be enhanced because these things take time and they're time consuming. So maybe there could be I don't know, I'm just thinking aloud now, a hygiene tunnel. You just walk through that, you get something sprayed on you, and you security scanned as well. There needs to be things in the about PRMs, people with restricted mobility. They have to be pushed like a concierge with them. How can that be made into a robotic function? So I think those people who are looking at innovations, who are sitting in these kinds of incubation centers, or who are entrepreneurial businessmen thinking about new ideas, which are linked to this industry, and it goes beyond that industry, they should start with these kinds of areas, because this is where it's not going to be a good to have, but I think it's going to be a necessity. And whoever comes up with the best solution in a timely manner would be able to capitalize.
Okay, thank you. Chris? Yeah, so kind of wrapping it up, as I said, I think if I was starting a company today, I would be and trying to figure out what my niche product was going to be. As I kind of hit on, I'd go back to looking at what trends were starting to kind of occur beforehand, and then trying to make that decision on whether or not that trend meets the kind of hits the check boxes that you think people are going to be looking at into the future. So in addition to automation, I think that the way we interact with technology is also going to be accelerated. You can see I've got the wireless headphones on, the AirPods. I think that you're going to see more and more technology around voice and voice interaction Because again, every time you walk in, if you're walking into the supermarket and you're touching the various items on the shelves, putting them in your basket, touching your basket, all that kind of stuff, do you really want to pull your phone out and start interacting with your phone that you then put to your face, right? So those are the types of things that take into those accounts that technology that people weren't really comfortable with, or maybe we're starting to get comfortable with before this, is just going to be accelerated. If you're looking at putting new technology into airports, I would say that airports are probably going to fall back to being conservative when it comes to spending on new technology. They're not going to have as much cash on hand, and they're most likely not going to be willing to run new experiments. However, if there is a new revenue model attached to that technology for the airport, they'll be more willing. So with the constriction of cash and the drastic drop in passengers, airports are going to start looking for new ways to monetize their asset. And what is their asset? They are, at the end of the day, a centrally located facility that requires people to travel through them with some type of credential. And that's one thing that I don't think enough startups take into account, is that every single person that walks on the other side of a secure area in an airport has some type of credential, whether it's a boarding pass or a badge or some type of, like, they've all have gone through some type of clearance and have some type of identifier. So to Mohammed's point, passenger tracking and what that data means is going to be very important, and you're going to see more and more value added to that. On the other hand, if you're a startup looking at this technology, please, please, please take security into account from the beginning, and that data security is going to be very important. While I think you're going to see, there are a lot of governments right now running experiments on trying to use this as an opportunity to gather more data on their citizens. I think Singapore has a contract tracing app that they released that is asking a lot of information and trying to gather a lot of data from their citizens who download that app. I also think that the hesitancy and kind of the wariness that people have when it comes to sharing their data, I don't think that's going away either. So if you're going to start tracking people, please take security into account from the beginning, because that's it. As governments try to figure out how to respond to this, there will be some oversteps, right? TSA in the United States was guilty of that so many times, where they implemented these new security measures and they took one step over the boundary, and the citizens of the United States kind of slapped them back and said, nope, we're not going to be okay with that. So they have to restrict their policies. And governments will make mistakes, because governments are run by people. I think they have the best intentions, most of them, but it's still, people are going to be very wary and guarded of their personal data as well.
This is the new business as usual. You can hear the doorbell, ringing in the background as well. You're just like, okay, how long can I ignore them for? But
I'm upset we didn't get a chance to meet your daughter. She didn't make a kind of a cameo in the background.
No, my daughter is in Karachi right now. I'm currently in Islamabad. So she's in another city, but she makes occasional appearances, by the way, at our different programs.
Those are my favorite news reporters, when their kids show up in the background.
She's moderated some of our events in the past. She's a cutie, and she's a bossy one as well. She's going to turn 10 this year, but sometimes she's acting as if she's my mom, right?
Yeah.
So, and then sometimes she pulls my chairs and tells me how cute I am, and I'm just like, okay, calm down. But look, to your point, right? We're already seeing new monetization happening, right? So with cargo is shooting up, because when passengers were not traveling, we saw on the other side this big business boom on that front. So again, there is opportunity there, because if prices are going to go up for different things that you're importing or exporting, there is an opportunity there as well. So let me ask for final thoughts from Mohammed Qazi. I'm just quickly going to go check who's at the door in the meantime, but the audience is listening. Okay, I'll be back in 1 sec.
Okay. From my side, I think I will start with where Chris finished off on the data side. And as you probably saw from the title, I'm CEO of data company called Data Protect. So for us, data plays a big part, and some of there's going to be a lot of data gathering from here on, and in order to bring the industry back to life, and therefore data protection is quite important. There've been a lot of hacks in the recent past. If you've been following in the press, hackers are trying to get into on the vaccine developments, for example. So they will try to get into the data which is being gathered at the airports, which is very credible data. So on Chris's point, data security is very important. Compliance is another thing where businesses have to really sharpen their tools now. There are international laws which have come into place, such as GDPR from European Union, General Data Protection Regulation, and any company which holds data of European individuals, they have to be compliant in terms of policies and procedures. So aviation industry is an international industry, so there are opportunities there. There is a room for growth there, and there is a real need there. So in my opinion, these are the certain things which need to be looked into. And other thing is that, as I've said before, but just to wrap up, it's time to negotiate and analyze and look at the tools which are available, look at the data which is available, look at past trends on when things have gone wrong and how matters have been rescued, and then merge that with the technological solutions which we've talked about. And this is where the opportunities lie, and this is where I think the industry is going to head.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you both, Chris. Now it's 6 o'clock, so you can still catch a morning nap maybe. I don't know if you're that sort of a person, but we used to be that way. Coming back to my daughter, by the way, she loves the new world because she says, she doesn't have to get up in the morning and go to school, and then even if there are certain portions of the class where they're kind of supposed to switch on their video and talk to one another, it happens usually around 11:30, so she has ample time. So the new normal, I think we're going to see a lot of new changes. I think, like you mentioned, Mohammad Qazi, right at the beginning, that human beings are very, very robust. We evolve, we complain, we will continue to complain, but we will, have to adjust simply because it is the new norm. So thank you very, very much, Chris and Mohammad Qazi, for joining us today. And, we'll keep asking you more questions as they come in.
Yeah,
okay,
thank you. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So guys, thank you very much for watching. For the ones who missed it, we will be reposting on our pages anyway. And this is just the first of the series, because I think there are lots and lots of other components to talk about as well when we talk about the entire aviation industry and how this is changing. We will be talking more about some new opportunities that are coming up in other industries as well, for instance, e-learning and edtech, etc. So stay tuned, and looking forward to talking to you guys some more next week. All right, Khudafez. Hello.